Okay, when graphing radicals, you first have to pay attention to if it's a square root, or if there's a little 3 there, it's a cube root. That changes the shape. Remember, square roots have a starting point, and then the arrow just goes in one direction, up and right, or up and left, or down and right, or down and left. What controls these directions are the A and the X. If A is positive, the graph opens up. If A is negative, the graph goes down. And the X. If the X is positive, the arrow goes to the right. If the X is negative, then the graph goes to the left. On cube roots, it's in a different situation. Cube roots exist for both positive and negative values. And so we either say they increase or they decrease because they have 2 arrows to consider. If A and X have the same sign, then the graph increases, which means it'll go from low on the left to high on the right. And if A or X are different, one's positive, one's negative, then it will decrease, start high on the left and go low on the right. And then the point from the equation, HK, is the middle value called the inflection point instead of the starting value. Okay, so this square root. We notice the 2/3 is positive, so the arrow will open up. We notice that the X is negative, so the arrow will go to the left, making this a little bit more difficult. The first thing you may want to do is switch the order of the 3 and the negative X. The X is negative, so it's still negative X in the front. The 3 is positive, so it's still 3. But now it looks more traditional. If the X is negative, separate the negative 1 from the X. Factor that greatest common factor out. That turns it into X minus 3. Nothing happens to the 2/3 and the negative 2 because they weren't in the square root. So now the formula has X minus, and then whatever you're subtracting is the value of H. So we're going to pull out that 3, and we're going to pull out the negative 2 for K. So there's our starting point, 3, negative 2, and the graph will go up and left, something like that. So once we draw it, now we can do our domain and range. Remember, domain are the X values, range is the Y values. So the domain we do from left to right. And the range we'll look at from the bottom to the top. Alright, so on the left side we see the arrow. The arrow is infinity. On the right side we're at positive 3. So for the domain we go from negative infinity to 3. Remember, parentheses by the infinity and square bracket where you can see the point touching x equals 3. Alright, so then the range from the bottom, x equals negative 2, y equals negative 2, to the top is the arrow. For the y-axis, the arrow is in the positive direction, so it'll be positive infinity this time. So from negative 2 to positive infinity. Parenthesis by the infinity, square bracket by the number. Okay, another square root. Here we see a negative 2, so that will make the arrow go down. X is positive this time though, so now it'll go to the right. Alright, so x is positive, no factoring of negative 1 needed, but the plus sign is not expected. The formula wants x minus h. So what must have happened was that there was minus a negative 1, which somebody helpfully turned into plus. So whatever's right after the minus is the h. So negative 1 is the h. The k is 7. Negative 1, 7 is right there. Now the graph will go down and to the right, and we're ready to do domain and range. Domain is the x's written down from left to right. Range is the y's written down from bottom to top. So on the left, x equals negative 1. On the right, x is the arrow heading towards positive numbers, so positive infinity. Negative 1 to positive infinity. Parenthesis by infinity, bracket by negative 1. The range from bottom to top. At the bottom we find the arrow, and even though the arrow is not negative yet, it will be soon. It is heading down the graph. So that's going to be negative infinity. At the top is 7. Square bracket by the number, parentheses by the infinity. Okay, lastly, notice this one's a cube root. With a cube root, we don't talk about up, down, left, right. We look at both. We see, hey, this number's negative, but my x is positive. My a is negative, but my x is positive. So when they're different signs, it will decrease. If they're the same sign, they would increase. Okay, so we need a point to be at the middle of our equation. There is no x, so it must be 0. I'm sorry, there is no number with x, so h must be 0. There is a k, which is negative 5. So 0, negative 5, we're down here. The graph decreases, so it's going to start high and end up low. There's a decreasing shape. So domain and range. Now remember, this is true of all cube roots. There's no variety here. When you write the domain and range for a cube root, you go from the arrow on the left to the arrow on the right. So negative infinity to positive infinity, both with parentheses. All x values can be plugged into a cube root. The same is true for the y values, the answers that you get out. Arrow at the bottom, arrow at the top. So negative infinity to positive infinity as well.